joined now by Paul Bledsoe. He's an Energy Fellow at Strategic Advisor for Progressive Policy Institute. Thanks so much for joining us there, Paul. Now, Democrats, of course, in the US are popping champagne over this climate bill, but the international community isn't quite doing the same thing. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that most people around the world recognize that when the largest economy in the world passes the greatest set of incentives for private sector investment, tens of trillions of dollars of new investments in energy over this century, that is reason to celebrate. The U.S. is finally back in the vanguard of climate protection, and now we can help China and other major emitters to begin to reduce their emissions because, of course, Chinese emissions are still growing and are not slated to be reduced until the end of this decade. U.S. emissions are falling, but with this bill, U.S. emissions are going to be cut 40% more by the end of this decade.
Interesting you mentioned China, though. Climate was one of the few areas where relations between China and the US remained positive, but China broke off discussions with the US following the visit to Taiwan by Speaker of the House. So how can global efforts really be resurrected here if the world's two superpowers can't really get on board together?
It's very unfortunate that China made the decision to break off negotiations on climate change with the United States, and I would urge President Xi and leaders in Beijing to resume those negotiations. Now that the U.S. will have the largest set of clean energy investments in the world, we know that China is making some good clean energy investments, but unfortunately China is still also using more than half of the world's coal and building new coal-fired plants. So China, in order to have credibility on climate change, has got to come back to the negotiating table with the United States now that the United States is acting again.
But shouldn't there be more onus on the United States to take greater financial responsibility given its role in the crisis, especially given that the US and other rich countries failed to keep their own promise to collectively provide $100 billion for climate finance to poor and vulnerable countries by 2020?
It's a good point. There is no question that the wealthier nations around the world, including I would say nations like China, who are developing nations but wealthier than most, need to contribute to help developing countries gain access to these clean energy technologies that are not only cleaner and less impact on health, but can reduce costs for the developing world. So China and the U.S. need to work together to help the developing world. The climate negotiations coming up in November will be in Egypt, in North Africa, in Sharm el-Sheikh. And I think this is a big opportunity for the U.S. and China to come together. And with the U.S. now going to have the largest clean energy economy by far in the world, to begin to bring these technologies to all nations so that we can cut global emissions.
This is obviously a bill that sets the stage on a federal level. How can government try and get states to invest in their local communities so that people, businesses are doing the things that they need to do to make sure that the US is hitting these targets on a federal level?
The good news is most U.S. states, over 30 U.S. states, already have significant incentives for clean energy, and we hope especially those in the southern United States and the South will do so as well. But again, this is a bill that is going to unleash tens of billions of dollars in just the next few years in new clean energy investments from the private sector. It's the private sector and consumers who are going to lead the clean energy transition. Consumers will pay less money for electric vehicles, for clean energy like wind and solar, and we'll have a better electrical grid that will increase efficiency. This is going to benefit American consumers and the climate.